The year is 1941. The world is tearing itself apart. From the frozen steppes of Russia to the deserts of North Africa, the Second World War rages, consuming nations and empires. Yet, in the heart of the Middle East, one nation strives to remain an island of calm in a sea of chaos. On the morning of August 25, 1941, a neutral nation, at peace with the world, is suddenly invaded from the north and the south. A meticulously planned, two-pronged assault pierces its borders without warning, a stunning violation of its sovereignty. The aggressors are not the Axis powers, whose conquests have redrawn the map of Europe. The attack comes from an unexpected quarter, not by the Axis, but by the Allies. This is the story of Operation Countenance, the invasion of Iran. A chapter of the Second World War often relegated to a footnote, yet one whose consequences were anything but minor. It was an operation born of desperation, a ruthless act of realpolitik that would secure a vital lifeline for the Allied cause. An invasion so crucial, it may have saved the world and doomed a king. To understand why, we must look to the desperate summer of 1941. 2 months earlier, Hitler had launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history, aimed at the heart of the Soviet Union. By August, the situation was dire. The Wehrmacht seemed unstoppable. By the summer of 1941, Hitler's armies pressed toward Moscow. The Allies were desperate. The Soviet Union, now a reluctant partner in the fight against Nazism, was on the verge of collapse. A Soviet defeat would free up millions of German soldiers to fight on other fronts, a catastrophic scenario for Great Britain, which stood nearly alone. Supplying the Soviets was paramount, but the routes were treacherous. The Arctic convoys were a death trap of U-boats and Luftwaffe attacks. The Pacific route was long and vulnerable to the Japanese. Churchill and Stalin scoured the globe for another option, a third way. And there, on the map, one country stood at the center of everything: Iran. Geographically, it was the perfect land bridge, connecting the Persian Gulf to the Soviet border. But politically, it was a minefield. Iran, or Persia as it was still widely known, was fiercely independent. Its neutrality was a cornerstone of its national policy. But in the brutal calculus of total war, its neutrality was a luxury the world could no longer afford. At the nation's helm was Reza Shah Pahlavi, a former army officer who had seized power in a 1921 coup. He was an autocrat with a grand vision. He had spent 2 decades dragging his country into the 20th century, building infrastructure, reforming the government, and forging a new national identity. Reza Shah modernized but distrusted Britain and the Soviets. He saw them as imperialist powers who had carved up his country for centuries. His distrust was well-founded in a long and bitter history of foreign interference. Seeking a third path, a partner without a history of imperialism in the region, Reza Shah had turned to Germany. Throughout the 1930s, economic and diplomatic ties flourished. Germany became Iran's top trading partner. He allowed hundreds of German technicians, a counterbalance in a great power struggle. These were engineers, advisors, and businessmen, crucial to his modernization projects. But to the Allies, their presence was a Trojan horse. London and Moscow presented Tehran with demands: expel the German nationals. Reza Shah stalled, viewing it as an infringement on his sovereignty. But the Allies saw a ticking clock. They feared the Germans were spies and saboteurs who could incite a pro-Axis coup, or worse, pave the way for a German advance through the Caucasus. For Churchill and Stalin, a Nazi-leaning Iran risked oil, the Caucasus, and British India. The nightmare scenario was a German pincer movement, linking up with their forces in Russia and seizing the entire Middle East. The invasion plan, Operation Countenance, had 2 primary non-negotiable goals. Objective 1, secure Abadan, the lifeblood of the British war effort in Asia. Located in the south, the Anglo-Iranian oil company's refinery at Abadan was the largest in the world. Its fuel powered the Royal Navy and the British armies from Egypt to Singapore. Losing it was unthinkable. Objective 2, seize the Trans-Iranian Railway, an engineering marvel. This was Reza Shah's crowning achievement, a 1,400-kilometer line stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Caspian Sea. It had been built entirely with Iranian capital to avoid foreign debt and influence. Ironically, the very symbol of his independence was now the primary reason he would lose it. For the Allies, this railway was the key. It was the only land route to move what the Soviets needed to survive. Tanks, trucks, planes, and food all could be unloaded at Persian Gulf ports and sent directly north to the Soviet border. With diplomatic avenues exhausted and the situation on the Eastern Front growing more desperate by the day, the order was given. At 4 a.m., the invasion began. From the north, the Red Army poured over the border. 3 entire armies, battle-hardened and ruthless, struck from Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan, their objective to seize Tabriz and then drive south toward the capital, Tehran. Simultaneously, from the south, British and Indian forces struck. Landing at the head of the Persian Gulf and advancing from their bases in Iraq, the force known as Iraq Force moved to capture the oil fields and the southern terminus of the railway. The Iranian military, though modernized by Reza Shah, was no match for 2 of the world's great powers. It was designed for internal security and regional conflicts, not a full-scale invasion by a global alliance. Iranian forces, surprised and outgunned, could not change the outcome. But they did not surrender without a fight. At scattered points across the country, from the naval bases on the Gulf to the mountain passes in the north, Iranian soldiers stood their ground against impossible odds. They fought with courage, but the resistance was tragically futile. At Abadan, a surprise amphibious assault by the Royal Navy neutralized the defenders. The small Iranian navy, Reza Shah's pride, was annihilated. Most of its ships were sunk at anchor before they could even raise steam. The Air Force, another symbol of his modernization, was similarly destroyed before it could get airborne. The Navy was sunk in hours, the Air Force wrecked on the ground. The campaign was swift and brutal. Within 3 days, Iranian resistance had effectively collapsed. The Soviet spearheads and the British columns advanced relentlessly toward the capital. Within days, Tehran was in a tightening vice. For Reza Shah, it was the ultimate humiliation. The foreign powers he had spent his life trying to defy were now at his gates. His army was broken, his country occupied. The Allies delivered an ultimatum. The Shah must abdicate. They saw him as too stubborn, too nationalistic, and too sympathetic to Germany to be a reliable partner. He had to go. Faced with the prospect of his country being completely dismembered or turned into a battlefield, Reza Shah made his final choice. On September 16, 1941, to preserve the integrity of his nation and his dynasty, he relinquished the peacock throne. To save his country, he ceded the throne to his 21-year-old son. The young, inexperienced Mohammad Reza Pahlavi would now have to navigate his occupied country through the remainder of the war. For Reza Shah, there was no reprieve. The British forced him into exile, first to the island of Mauritius, and then to Johannesburg, South Africa, far from the country he had forged. Exiled, he died 3 years later, a stark lesson in wartime calculus. A powerful ruler, undone by the geopolitical forces of a war he desperately tried to avoid. With the Shah gone and his son installed as a compliant figurehead, the Allies achieved their strategic goals. With Iran secured, the Persian Corridor roared to life. The Trans-Iranian Railway was taken over by British and American Army engineers. Ports were expanded, roads were built, and a massive logistical network was established. The scale of the operation was staggering. Over a quarter of all Lend-Lease to the USSR, more than 4 million tons, flowed here. It was a torrent of war material, thousands of aircraft, tens of thousands of tanks and trucks, and millions of tons of food, fuel, and raw materials. This was the aid that Stalin himself would later admit was critical to the Soviet war effort. This vital artery pumped life into the Eastern Front at its most critical moments. These supplies helped push the Red Army from Stalingrad to Berlin, The trucks that carried Soviet infantry westward, the planes that cleared their path, the fuel that powered their tanks. Much of it came through Iran. The occupation's strategic importance was cemented 2 years later. In 1943, the Big Three met in Tehran, symbol and consequence of occupation and victory. The choice of venue was no accident. It was the only place where the ailing President Roosevelt could meet Stalin and Churchill, a direct result of the Allied control established by Operation Countenance. Here, in the occupied capital, they planned the final stages of the war, including the D-Day landings that would seal Hitler's fate. The invasion of Iran was a brutal, pragmatic decision that violated a nation's sovereignty. For Iranians, it brought occupation, economic hardship, and political instability that would echo for decades. But in the unforgiving logic of World War II, it was a decisive move. It secured the oil, opened a critical supply line, and directly contributed to the defeat of Nazi Germany. Operation Countenance was no sideshow. It reshaped the war and the Middle East. Watch next, our deep dive on the Book of Enoch.